This is the third video lecture on the chapter of race and ethnicity. In this video lecture, I want to talk about prejudice, racism, and discrimination. Prejudice, the important point here is that prejudice is an idea. Discrimination is an action. Prejudice is an idea. Kind of like norms and values. Excuse me, I have to go stop. Sorry about that. Okay, so prejudice. Prejudice is an attitude. Prejudice is a belief. It is not an action. That is discrimination. Racism is a form of prejudice based on race. Typically, we think of racism as negative, that these are negative beliefs. So the term prejudice, if you take it apart, it looks like to prejudge. So these are attitudes that we have most of the time based on limited information. Stereotypes are when we hold prejudged, we have limited amount of information, we hold a belief about something, and then we just have a little bit of information, and then we over apply that, we over generalize. So I like to think about stereotypes, and this is an idea I stole from somebody else, is they are kernels of truth. There is something in a stereotype that is probably true, but but it's a weed. So it's grown out of place. It's grown beyond its kernel of truth, and it's taken over, and it's completely distorted what might in fact be there. I mean, that's kind of like what a weed does, right? So you get a weed, and if you don't pull it out right away, it takes over the whole flower bed. I've been thinking about that because I've been doing a lot of flower gardening, right? Okay, so prejudice is a belief. You can have both positive and negative prejudices. Sociologists argue that both of these are bad because both of these fail to see the full person. So a positive stereotype or a positive prejudice might be that you hold, right, based on race, that you assume Native or assume Asian Americans are better students than non-Asian American students. So an Asian American student walks into your class, you assume they're going to be really good, they're going to be really smart, they're not going to need any help. You don't give them help, but that's an overgeneralization, that's a stereotype, and in fact they do need help, but because you're operating under your stereotype, you don't give them the help they need, and they struggle and don't do as well. Right, so some are, well, I think some are probably more harmful, but neither good nor bad ones allow for the full human to be seen. Racism, negative, there can be both overt racism and subtle racism. So a friend of mine, a black man friend of mine, used to say that he preferred the racism in the South to the racism in the North. In other words, from, like Louisiana, Alabama to Michigan and Montana, because he argued that in the South, it was explicit, it was overt, it was clear. The divisions, the social divisions based on race were very clear and established. And so a black person didn't have to wonder were they being treated because they were black, because they knew they were. But in the North, he said, people pretend to be nice, they act like they're nice, and you wonder if they're treating you different or if you're being treated the same. And so, or another term that often gets used when we talk about the subtlety versus over, so what we call microaggressions. And this comes out of some of the anti-racism literature. And microaggressions are when we say, and it may be, I believe that racism, I like the metaphor that it's in the air you breathe, that it is everywhere, and that we breathe it in because we have to breathe. It's like oxygen, like it's like pollution in the air. You have to breathe, so you're going to breathe in some of the pollution. And unless I have clean air to breathe, I'm going to be breathing in this poisoned racist. So microaggressions, I want to believe, are not intentional, that people do not intend, but that does not mean that they don't hurt and they don't inflict. And the little cuts right? The little cuts of the microaggressions, things like, wow, you speak really good for a Black person. That is, well, that's more than a microaggression. That's just awful, right? Those little cuts become very deep cuts when they happen all the time. It's like wearing a new pair of shoes, right? And it rubs a little bit, and in the beginning of the day, it doesn't hurt very much. But by the time you get to evening, it's this huge blister. And that's sort of what microaggressions do, or things like, can I touch your hair? That's a big no-no, guys. Don't go around touching each other's hair. And as I've said to, I think I've said to all my classes this semester before all this came to pass, was I want to be an anti-racist, and because I'm breathing this poisoned air, I invite you to call me out. And if I say or act in a way that's racist, please tell me. Please tell me. I don't want to be that way. I will not take it personal. I will not be offended. I will take it that you trust me, and you trust me enough to help me be, and you care enough about me and my well-being that you want me to be a better person. So anyway, that's anti-racism. Moving down, and again, I would love to have this a long, lengthy conversation about racism and all of this stuff. Moving down to the next chapter, our textbook talks about a couple different theories as to, because not all people are explicitly or as overtly racist. There's a couple different theories. One is called the frustration aggression hypothesis. This one comes from, well, I think of the movie Gran Torino. The idea is that people who feel threatened, or they're frustrated, or they feel like they have less control over their life, they see things changing and they can't do anything about it, that they act out, that it's kind of like the example, I saw a cartoon one time, and the boss was yelling at the employee, and the employee was a man, and he went home and he yelled at his wife. And the wife turned and she yelled at her son, and the son turned and yelled at the little daughter, and the daughter turned and kicked the dog. It's the idea that when you are frustrated, you have to take it out on somebody. You have to take your frustration and your inability to acquire, you have to blame someone. And some people's personalities are such that they turn to the scapegoats, right? The scapegoat is actually mentioned in the Old Testament, right? Is where you would put all of your sins on a goat and you would let the goat escape. And when the goat escaped, it took away all of your sins. In this case, the scapegoat is the people that you blame for all of your troubles. So in the movie Gran Torino, he blames his Korean neighbors for all of his problems. In my neighborhood, as I get more and more beer cans in my yard, I could blame the students, right, for the problems that I'm having. And because they're who I see. Where in reality, it's the landlords that don't tell their tenants and don't treat their tenants well, right? But okay, that's the scapegoat. The other one, the authoritarian personality. So this theory says that it's less about what a person is experiencing, it's more about their patterns of thought. And that people who are excessively conforming, so people who are rule followers and believe everyone should follow the rules, right? They believe in following authority, never question authority. You do what the boss says. You do what the president said. And they're intolerant. Everyone needs to follow these same set of rules. And if you're not following these same set of rules, you must follow these same. Everyone must speak English, right? So they're intolerant of anybody who doesn't follow the rules and doesn't respect the same authority that I respect. And because my sense of autonomy, my sense of self-control, I don't feel like insecure. So I'm insecure, I'm threatened when you do something different, I'm threatened when we don't all follow the rules, this is how it's supposed to be, and by God, it's gonna be like this, and if you're not gonna follow these rules, there's something wrong with you, right? Where in reality, there's something wrong with me. Highly superstitious, also rigid, stereotypical thinking. So there are certain, and these are usually lower income, less educated. I think it's also men too, right? Conservative, religious, in terms of their politics, lower income and less educated. So basically, again, if you're looking at this triangle, right, it would be the people down here at the bottom of the triangle that have fewer options. There's some overlap with both of these theories. And one of those overlaps is that this is somebody, these are people who don't like changes, don't like the things that are changing around them, and don't have a whole lot of control as to how to respond to those changes. So, and when people don't do what they think they're supposed to do, they regard them in a negative, and usually if these people are different, you know, so it could be all the isms, all the negative attitudes. Maybe it's an ism based on race, maybe it's an ism based on religion, maybe it's sexism, maybe it's they're damn liberals, who knows, right? But the point is that the world is changing around them, and they can't, in ways that they don't choose for the world to change, and they can't really do anything about it, right? People at the bottom. I think I'm going to stop here because I'm already at 11 minutes, and when we come back, we will talk about discrimination.